15,000 cavalry thundered down the Kahlenberg Heights in a single devastating charge that shattered the largest army in Ottoman history and saved European civilization from Islamic conquest. The ground shook under 72,000 hooves as Polish Winged Hussars led the most decisive cavalry assault ever recorded. In 18 minutes of pure kinetic violence, King John Sobieski's relief force obliterated 150,000 strong siege army that had held Vienna captive for 2 months. When the dust settled, the Ottoman Empire's 300-year expansion into Europe was finished forever.
Picture this. You're standing on Vienna's shattered walls on September 11th.
Watching 150,000 enemy warriors camped in a crescent, stretching 25 kilometers around your dying city. Turkish siege guns pound your defenses with 24 LB iron balls. Ottoman sappers tunnel beneath your feet, preparing to explode the last intact bastions. Your garrison of 11,000 defenders has been reduced to eating leather and rats. The Sultan's green banners flutter from positions just 100 meters from your gates. But here's what the Ottoman chronicles don't tell you about September 12th. Grand Vizier Khan Mustafa Pasha, the architect of this siege, went to sleep that night, convinced he would dine in the Hofburg Palace within 24 hours. His intelligence reports showed Vienna's walls breached in 3 places. His Janissary assault troops had already prepared scaling ladders for the final storm. The city's relief signals had gone silent for 5 days. The mathematics seemed impossible to overcome. Kara Mustafa commanded the largest Ottoman army ever assembled for European conquest. 60,000 elite Janissaries formed the core, slave soldiers trained from childhood who had never known defeat. 40,000 Sipahi heavy cavalry provided the striking power that had terrorized European battlefields for 3 centuries. 50,000 irregulars, Tartars, Wakians, and Hungarian rebels filled the ranks. The Grand Vizier's personal tent, magnificent with silk and gold, housed battle plans for the conquest of Munich, Cologne, and ultimately Paris itself. Against this Islamic avalanche stood Count Ernst Rütiger von Starberg, with 11,000 exhausted defenders trapped behind crumbling stone walls. The Imperial garrison had been fighting continuously for 59 days. Their ammunition was nearly exhausted. Disease ravaged the civilian population. Even the rats had been eaten. Then came the message that changed everything. A single coded letter smuggled through Turkish lines on September 8th. 3 words in Latin that electrified the dying garrison. Veno, video, venco. I come, I see, I conquer. Jan III Soi, King of Poland, was approaching with 60,000 men of the Holy League Relief Army. The Polish king had covered 300 kilometers in 15 days, marching through hostile territory while Ottoman raiders snapped at his flanks. His force represented the largest Christian coalition assembled since the First Crusade. 18,000 Polish Winged Hussars formed the devastating spearhead. 10,000 German and Austrian infantry provided the anvil. Saxon cavalry, Imperial drons, and Bavarian pike squares filled the ranks. Holy Roman Emperor Leopold IV had abandoned Vienna in panic, but the Polish Lion was coming to finish what the Habsburgs couldn't. Sobie's army crested the Kahlenberg Heights on September 11th. As the sun set behind them, the sight that greeted them defied belief. The Ottoman siege stretched like a dark ocean around Vienna's walls. Hundreds of cooking fires twinkled in the gathering dusk. The crescent banners of Islam flew from positions that had been Christian territory for 400 years. The largest army in Ottoman history lay spread below them, confident in victory, unaware that death was gathering on the hills above. But Kara Mustafa had made one fatal error in his moment of triumph. The Grand Vizier had positioned his entire force between the Danube River and the Kenberg slopes. With Vienna at his back, there was nowhere to retreat. When the Christian cavalry charged, his massive army would be trapped against the very city walls they had spent 2 months trying to breach. The stage was set for the largest cavalry charge in recorded history. The siege began at dawn on July 14, 1683, with the thunder of 130 Ottoman cannons, unleashing hell upon Vienna's ancient walls. Khan Mustafa's artillery barrage shook buildings 3 miles away as 24 PB iron balls smashed into the Lalbast and Berg Basti bastions. Within hours, chunks of masonry tumbled into the mows, while Turkish engineers measured angles for their devastating mining operations. The Grand Vizier watched from his silk pavilion, stroking his beard as he calculated the mathematics of conquest. 60 days, he told his war council. Vienna would fall in 60 days. By the 3rd week of July, the Ottoman siege machine demonstrated why it had conquered half of Europe. Turkish sappers, veterans of B-grade in Budapest, began their underground war. They dug approached trenches that zigzagged toward Vienna's walls, each section protected by gabions stuffed with earth and stone. Behind these earthworks, Janissary marksmen with long-barreled muskets picked off any defender who showed his head above the ramparts. Count Starberg's men learned to move only at night, crawling along the battlements like shadows. The real terror came from beneath. Ottoman mining corps recruited from the silver mines of Anatolia, tunneled through Vienna's clay subsoil with precision that terrified the defenders. Each underground gallery advanced 20 meters per week toward the foundation stones of the bastions. Starberg's counterminers worked frantically to intercept these tunnels, fighting desperate subterranean battles in chambers barely wide enough for a sword thrust. The sound of Turkish pickaxes grew louder each day, a constant reminder that death was digging toward them through the darkness. Here's what the Imperial War Council records don't tell you about August 1683. Vienna's defenders weren't just fighting an army. They were fighting time itself. The city's grain stores, calculated to feed 50,000 civilians and soldiers for 6 months, dwindled to 3 weeks' supply by mid-August. Horses died first, their carcasses dragged to mass graves beyond the cathedral. Then came the dogs, the cats. Finally, the rats that infested the cellars. Children with hollow eyes begged for crusts of bread that cost a gold ducat each. Disease stalked the narrow streets with more efficiency than Turkish bullets. Dysentery killed 200 civilians per week. Typhus spread through the overcrowded cellars where families huddled during the daily bombardments. The city's wells, fouled by decomposing bodies and human waste, produced water that tasted of death. Starberg's daily reports to the absent Emperor Leopold painted an increasingly desperate picture. Augustus and 15th, the enemy mines advanced daily. August 22nd, our powder magazine reduced to 40 barrels. August the 30th, without immediate relief, the city cannot endure beyond September 15th. Then everything changed on August 31st, when Turkish mines exploded beneath the Lubelbasti. The massive detonation hurled stone blocks 300 meters into the air and opened a breach 40 meters wide. Smoke and dust obscured the morning sun as 5,000 janissaries surged forward with scaling ladders and curved sabers. For 6 hours, desperate hand-to-hand combat raged in the rubble-filled gap. Starberg himself led the counterattack, his sword cutting down 3 Janissary officers. 4 Austrian reinforcements sealed the breach with their bodies. The Ottoman confidence grew with each passing day. Khan Mustafa's dispatch to Sultan Mehmed IV in Istanbul grew increasingly boastful. The Grand Vizier ordered silk carpets for the victory celebration in St. Stephen's Cathedral. His cooks prepared lamb and rice for 50,000 warriors to feast after Vienna's fall. Turkish merchants in the siege camp raised prices on European slaves, anticipating the flood of Austrian prisoners. Even the weather seemed to favor Islamic conquest, as September brought clear skies perfect for the final assault. By September 8th, Ottoman trenches reached within 50 meters of Vienna's inner walls. Turkish marksmen could hit individual defenders from their advanced positions. The constant crack of musket fire echoed through streets where terrified civilians pressed themselves against cellar walls. Janissary assault troops sharpened their yataghans and checked their scaling equipment. The siege had consumed 8,000 Austrian lives and reduced Europe's greatest fortress to a hollow shell defended by walking skeletons. Yet Starberg refused every surrender demand. The Austrian count knew that 60,000 relief troops were marching south through Bohemia, led by the most famous cavalry commander in Europe. Jan Sobieski's messengers had promised arrival by September 10th. 2 days remained before Vienna's walls crumbled completely, but as September 10th dawned with no sign of Polish banners on the horizon, even Starberg began to doubt whether salvation would arrive in time. September 10th passed without salvation. The horizon remained empty of Polish banners as Ottoman mines exploded beneath the Bergbasti at precisely noon, opening a second breach that sent tremors through Vienna's cathedral bells. This time 8,000 Janissaries poured through the gap like a flood of steel and silk, their white felt caps bobbing above curved scimitars as they carved through the Austrian defenders. Count Starberg, blood streaming from a saber cut across his forehead, rallied his remaining 4,000 men for what everyone knew would be the final stand. The mathematics of survival had become impossible. Each Ottoman assault wave contained more men than Vienna's entire garrison. By nightfall on September 10th, Turkish banners flew from the outer bastions. Kara Mustafa's personal standard, a green silk crescent moon on black field, was planted just 200 meters from St. Stephen's Cathedral. The Grand Vizier stood in his conquered trenches, surveying the dying city through a Turkish telescope inlaid with Persian silver. His engineers reported that one more mining operation would collapse the remaining inner wall. His assault troops had already divided the loot from Vienna's churches and palaces. Tomorrow would bring total victory and the keys to Central Europe. Here's where legend meets cold mathematical reality. At the exact moment Vienna seemed doomed, 60,000 Christian warriors were completing the most audacious relay. March in military history. Jan Sobieski's Polish army had covered 300 kilometers in 15 days, moving faster than any force of comparable size in recorded history. The Polish king drove his men mercilessly, knowing that every hour's delay meant more Austrian blood soaking into Vienna's cobblestones. His winged rode 18 hours per day, their distinctive feathered wings creating an otherworldly silhouette against the September sky. What happened next defied every principle of Ottoman intelligence gathering. Despite commanding 150,000 men and controlling every road within 50 kilometers, Kara Mustafa's scouts completely failed to detect Soy's approach. The Grand Vizier's attention had focused so completely on Vienna's crumbling walls that he ignored the wider strategic picture. Turkish patrols, drunk on anticipated victory, grew careless in their reconnaissance. Not a single Ottoman officer suspected that the largest Christian army in 200 years was approaching through the Venuswald forests. The Polish vanguard reached the Keilenberg Heights at dawn on September 11th, just as Turkish artillery began its daily bombardment of Vienna's ruins. Prince Eugene of Savoy, leading 12,000 Imperial cavalry, crested the ridge first and surveyed a sight that stopped his breath. Below stretched the most magnificent military camp in Ottoman history. Silk pavilions in every color covered the valley floor like a Persian garden. Thousands of cooking fires sent smoke spirals into the morning air. Horse lines stretched for kilometers, containing the finest Arabian industrious money could buy. The Sultan's personal war chest, worth 3 million gold ducats, gleamed from beneath striped awnings. But Sobieski saw something his Austrian allies missed. The Ottoman camp's very magnificence revealed a fatal weakness. Kara Mustafa had positioned his entire army with their backs to the Danube River and Vienna's walls. There were only 2 narrow bridges across the water. If the Ottoman line broke, 150,000 men would be trapped between Christian cavalry and the city they had spent 2 months trying to capture. The Grand Vizier's confidence had created the perfect killing ground. That evening, as Turkish drums echoed victory songs across the valley, Soys gathered his war council in a captured monastery overlooking the Ottoman positions. The Polish king, 54 years old but still possessed of the physical power that had made him Europe's most feared cavalry commander, spread captured Turkish maps across a wooden table. His plan was breathtaking in its simplicity and terrible in its implications. At dawn, 60,000 Christians would attack along a 10 kilometers front. The infantry would engage the Ottoman center, while 18,000 cavalry mass for the decisive blow. As midnight approached on September 11th, Soys penned his final letter to his beloved wife, Maris Sianka in Kov. The words would echo through history. I came, I saw, God conquered. But first, God would work through 72,000 hooves thundering down from the Karlenberg at 30 kilometers per hour. The largest cavalry charge in history was 12 hours away. Dawn broke on September 12th, with the clash of 60,000 warriors preparing for battle. Christian trumpets sounded reveal from the Karlenberg heights as Polish, Austrian, and German commanders positioned their forces along a 10 kilometers front. Below in the valley, Ottoman drums answered with a thunderous response that shook leaves from the trees. Khan Mustafa emerged from his silk pavilion, expecting another day of siege operations against Vienna's crumbling walls. Instead, he found himself staring at the largest Christian army assembled in 2 centuries. The battle began at 6:06 a.m., with Prince Eugene's Austrian infantry advancing down the eastern slopes in perfect formation. 10,000 Imperial pike squares moved like clockwork mechanisms, their steel points glinting in the morning sun. Behind them marched 8,000 German musketeers in disciplined ranks, their match cords smoking in the crisp September air. The sight was magnificent and terrifying, a river of steel flowing down the hillsides toward the Ottoman positions. Kara Mustafa responded exactly as Soys had anticipated. The Grand Vizier committed 40,000 infantry to meet the Christian advance, confident that his numerical superiority would crush this relief attempt like every other European expedition. Janissary companies wheeled into battle lines with practiced precision, their white caps bobbing above razor-sharp yataghans. Behind them, 20,000 Sipahi cavalry formed in glittering G crescent, waiting for the moment to deliver the killing blow against broken Christian formations. For 4 hours, the battle raged across the valley floor, with neither side gaining decisive advantage. Austrian pike squares held firm against Janissary charges, while Turkish horse archers peppered German musketeers with deadly volleys. The clash of steel rang across the battlefield as 100,000 men fought with professional skill and desperate courage. Ottoman sources report losing 3,000 men in the morning fighting. Christian casualties mounted to 2,500 killed and wounded. The mathematics suggested a grinding war of attrition that favored the numerically superior Turks. But here's what Khan Mustafa failed to understand about Jan Sobieski's tactical genius. The Polish king had spent 4 hours positioning his enemies exactly where he wanted them. Every Ottoman regiment committed to the infantry battle was one less unit available to resist the coming cavalry avalanche. As the clock approached 4 p.m., 60,000 Turkish warriors stood locked in combat with their backs to the Danube River, completely unaware that death was gathering on the hills above them. Then everything changed in a single moment that split history in half. At precisely 4:44 p.m., 18,000 cavalry began the largest mounted charge in recorded warfare. The ground trembled under 72,000 hooves as Polish Winged Hussars led the thunderous descent from the Kahlenberg heights. Behind Soy's spearhead rode German cuirassiers, Austrian Drons, and Saxon heavy cavalry forming a steel avalanche 3 kilometers wide. Picture this. You're a Janissary veteran standing in the Ottoman front line, blooded from 4 hours of combat, but confident in your unit's discipline. Suddenly, the earth begins to shake. You turn toward the hills and see something that defies comprehension. 18,000 armored horsemen charging down the slopes at 30 kilometers an hour, their lance points forming a forest of death. The Polish Hussars' feathered wings create an otherworldly silhouette that seems supernatural in its terror. The impact velocity was devastating beyond calculation. A mounted knight at full gallop generates kinetic energy equivalent to a modern automobile collision. When 18,000 such projectiles struck the Ottoman left flank simultaneously, physics became more deadly than courage. The Turkish line didn't break, it simply ceased to exist. Janissary companies that had held firm against pike and musket dissolved like smoke before the cavalry hurricane. Within minutes, panic spread through Ottoman ranks like wildfire. Elite units that had never known defeat broke and ran toward the Danube bridges. The Sultan's personal guard, 5,000 of the finest warriors in the Islamic world, abandoned their positions without striking a blow. Karim Mustafa's magnificent war tent stuffed with golden treasures and battle maps was overrun by Polish cavalry who trampled priceless Persian carpets under their destrious hooves. The pursuit became a massacre that lasted until darkness fell. Ottoman casualties mounted catastrophically, 15,000 dead on the field, 5,000 drowned attempting to cross the Danube, countless thousands scattered across the Austrian countryside, so cavalry lost fewer than 400 men in the entire engagement. The 451 casualty ratio defied every principle of medieval warfare. As the sun set on September 12, 1683, the Ottoman Empire's expansion into Europe was finished forever. In 18 minutes of pure kinetic violence, Jan Sois had shattered 300 years of Islamic conquest and saved European civilization from the Sultan's green banners. When the guns fell silent at sunset on September the 12th, the killing ground around Vienna defied comprehension. Ottoman bodies carpeted the valley floor and windows where Sobieski's cavalry had struck, creating ghastly pathways of death that stretched for kilometers. Ridless Turkish horses wandered among the corpses, their silk-draped saddles empty, their Arabian bloodlines now serving no master. High-ranking passes, identifiable by their jeweled turbans and Damascus steel, lay twisted in the mud alongside common janissaries, whose white caps were stained crimson with their life's blood. The mathematics of slaughter told the story of 18 minutes that changed history. Polish cavalry chaplain walking the field with scribes counted 20,000 Ottoman dead before darkness forced them to halt their grim census. Drowning victims pulled from the Danube added another 3,000 to the toll. Turkish warriors who had died attempting to reach the safety of the eastern shore. Prisoners numbered 15,000, including 400 officers and 3 parishers of the Imperial Council. Against this carnage, Christian casualties seemed almost miraculous in their lightness. Soy's entire relief army had lost 1,500 men with only 400 cavalry deaths, despite leading the most devastating charge in military history. Here's what the Imperial War Council records reveal about the immediate aftermath. Qam Mustafa's magnificent command tent, larger than most European churches, fell intact to Polish house treasures that boggled the mind. The Grand Vizier's personal war chest contained 300,000 gold ducats in Venetian coins, enough to fund an entire campaign. Persian carpets worth a king's ransom lay trampled under cavalry hooves. Battle maps showing planned Ottoman advances to Munich and Prague were scattered among overtoned coffee cups and abandoned hookahs. The Sultan's sacred standard, a green silk banner blessed in Mecca, was found abandoned in a puddle of spilled rosewater. But the psychological devastation exceeded even the material losses. For 3 centuries, Ottoman armies had advanced like an unstoppable tide, conquering Constantinople, Belgrade, Budapest, and reaching the gates of Vienna twice. The aura of Islamic invincibility carefully cultivated through generations of victory, shattered like Venetian glass against Polish steel. Surviving Turkish officers reported that elite Janissary units, men who had never retreated in their lives, broke and ran at the first sight of winged houses charging down the hillsides. Soy himself, blood-spattered and exhausted, made the decision that defined his strategic genius. His nobles begged permission to pursue the routed Ottoman army, to complete the destruction and perhaps capture the Grand Vizier himself. The road to Buda lay open. Turkish garrisons throughout Hungary were panicking. A determined pursuit might have driven Islamic forces completely from European soil within months. Yet the Polish king refused. Victory had taught him what defeat had not taught Karam Mustafa. Armies, even triumphant ones, reached limits of endurance and supply. His cavalry horses, magnificent in their charge, were blown from the effort. His infantry, though victorious, had marched 300 kilometers and fought for 12 hours. Pursuit into hostile territory could transform triumph into disaster through a single tactical error. Discipline had won the day. Only discipline could preserve it. What followed was celebration tinged with exhaustion and awe. Polish hussars, still wearing their blood-stained wings, knelt among the corpses to offer prayers for the souls of the dead. Austrian infantry, men who had witnessed the impossible, sat in stunned silence as they cleaned their weapons. Even hardened German mercenaries, veterans of a dozen campaigns, spoke in whispers about the cavalry charge that had defied every law of warfare they understood. The strategic consequences rippled across Europe like earthquakes. Tremors. In Paris, Louis XIV received news of Ottoman defeat with mixed emotions, knowing that Habsburg power would now dominate Central Europe. In Rome, Pope Innocent V ordered Te Deum sung in every church, proclaiming September 12th, a feast day for the salvation of Christendom. In Istanbul, Sultan Mehmed the Fifer received Khan Mustafa's dispatch reporting temporary setbacks and began planning the Grand Vizier's execution. Within Vienna's liberated walls, Count Starberg and his surviving 4,000 defenders emerged from their cellars like men resurrected from the dead. 2 months of siege warfare had reduced them to walking skeletons, but they had held their posts until salvation arrived. Church bells that had been silent for 60 days rang out across the city, their bronze voices proclaiming that the presence of Islam would never again threaten the heart of Europe. The age of Ottoman expansion was over. The tide of history had turned on a September afternoon in 18 minutes of cavalry thunder. The tremors from September 12th rippled across the Islamic world like cracks in a shattered foundation. Within 3 months, Khan Mustafa Pasha met his fate in Belgrade, strangled with a silk bowring on Sultan Mehmed IV's direct orders. The Grand Vizier, who had promised to plant Ottoman banners in Paris, died knowing that his defeat had triggered the empire's irreversible decline. His execution sent a message of imperial fury, but it could not resurrect the 20,000 elite warriors buried in Austrian soil, or restore the aura of invincibility that had died with them. The strategic consequences cascaded across Europe with mathematical precision. Hungarian cities that had trembled at the approach of Turkish armies suddenly found courage to resist. Buda, the jewel of Ottoman Hungary, fell to Imperial forces in 1686 after a siege that lasted just 78 days. Belgrade, the gateway to the Balkans, capitulated in 1688. The very fortresses that had anchored Ottoman power for centuries crumbled like dominoes before Habsburg armies, emboldened by Soy's impossible victory. Here's what military historians discovered when they studied the battle's tactical innovations centuries later. The Vienna charge became the template for every successful cavalry assault that followed. Frederick the Great's Prussian Courier at Rossbach, Napoleon's heavy cavalry at Austerlitz, even Wellington's household cavalry at Waterloo, all employed principles that Soys had perfected on September 12th. Mass, momentum, and perfect timing could overcome any numerical disadvantage. The Polish king had proven that 18,000 disciplined horsemen, properly led and precisely timed, possessed more combat power than 150,000 scattered infantry. But the psychological revolution exceeded even the tactical breakthroughs. Before Vienna, European armies approached Ottoman forces with defensive mentality born from 3 centuries of defeats. After Vienna, that fear evaporated like morning mist. Christian command. RS discovered that Turkish janissaries, for all their legendary discipline, could break and run like any other soldiers when faced with overwhelming shock action. The myth of Islamic invincibility, carefully constructed through generations of conquest, could never be rebuilt once shattered by Polish wings. The cultural memory of September 12th embedded itself in European consciousness with surprising permanence. Coffee houses, those distinctly Viennese institutions, emerged from the tons of Turkish coffee beans abandoned in Khan Mustafa's camp. The croissant, shaped to mock the Islamic crescent, became a daily reminder of Ottoman defeat baked fresh each morning. Even the waltz, Vienna's gift to European culture, celebrated the swirling motion of cavalry charges that had saved the city from Islamic conquest. Yet perhaps the battle's greatest legacy lay not in what it accomplished, but in what it revealed, about leadership under impossible pressure. Yan Sui had demonstrated that true military genius expressed itself not through reckless courage but through patient calculation combined with perfect timing. The Polish king had waited 4 hours while his allies bled, watching 100,000 enemies position themselves exactly where his cavalry could destroy them. Such restraint required nerves of steel and unshakable confidence in mathematical realities that lesser commanders could never grasp. The Ottoman Empire limped onward for another 240 years, but September 12th marked the end of its expansion. And the beginning of its long retreat. Never again would Turkish armies threaten the heart of Europe. Never again would Islamic crescent fly from the gates of major European cities. The tide of conquest that had swept from Central Asia to the outskirts of Vienna finally broke against Polish steel and Austrian determination. Modern military memes still analyze Siekie's charge as the perfect example of operational patience combined with tactical violence. Staff colleges from Sandhurst to West Point teach the Vienna principles: absorb pressure to create opportunity, mass forces at the decisive point, strike with overwhelming concentration when the enemy least expects it. The Polish king's 18-minute masterpiece became a template for defeating numerically superior foes through superior timing and unbreakable discipline. The silence after the last Turkish drum fell quiet on September 12, 1683, marked more than the end of a siege. It announced the conclusion of Islam's 300-year expansion into Europe and the dawn of Habsburg dominance that would shape the continent for centuries. 18,000 cavalry had thundered down the Kahlenberg Heights in the largest mounted charge in recorded history, shattering an empire's confidence in 18 minutes of pure kinetic destruction. When the impossible becomes inevitable, when discipline conquers desperation, when perfect timing transforms numerical weakness into overwhelming strength, armies discover that victory belongs not to the largest force, but to the one that chooses the perfect moment to unleash hell. At Vienna, Jean Suisse proved that 18,000 men with unshakable will could indeed crush 150,000 with divided attention. In war, as in life, mathematics yields to mathematics properly applied.